And yeah, and so one of the things I wanted to do today was to just answer questions. Yeah, just have a question, a session in which I answer questions and just reflect on the journey. Because some people, like Salem, has been with us from the very beginning, and Urag joined, a long time ago, and you guys have been regulars. And I think one of the things I want to do is ask questions and and just talk about what dystopian mask has been for you. I'll tell you what it's been for me. Because when when genocide in Gaza started, I was aware of what was going on in Congo and Sudan was simmering, and so yeah, and so as a result of that, I remember my daughter told me, "Look, there's something happening in Gaza, and Dad, this is very different." And I said, no, I said, this is normal. They do this every year. She said, no, Dad, this is very different. And then she would come check in on me, and I would tell her, okay, so these are the moves that are happening, and this is what I expect to happen. And I was bang, it was. I'm not boasting, but I was bang. I was right. I was on the button every time. And then I think after about the second or third week, my daughter said to me, she said, well, why are you just telling me this? You need to be sharing this with people. And I had taken before then a deliberate decision to be quiet on geopolitical matters because it tended to attract the wrong attention, or in other words, the right attention. And so I then started sharing first on Instagram. Okay. And then I thought I needed something which was a bit more long form because you really had to give history, etc., of how we got here, um, and and how our thought had been arrived at. Because often what happens is that we think in ways which we think they are common sense, but the common sense has been shaped, right? Which Gramsci calls the hegemony, right? Um, which actually he took from Lenin, and 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 so and so I began to share here on Dystopia Unmasked. I kept doing that, every year for since every at that point almost weekly. I maintained that weekly. Yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. I've got a message from Anurag. Yeah, that's right. There's no better way to celebrate Christmas, winter solstice eve. I read yesterday's article of the tone for the future. Yes, 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 yes. And I'm going to talk about um, where I'm going, right, or where I intend to go, right? Because sometimes we intend, but events sometimes change the direction, and this has been and dystopian mask has been very much like that because we've responded to the pressure. So sometimes you've seen me. I've written with my pen in controlled fury, right? Um, and that's clear from some of the ways that I've dealt. I've written that I was furious, um, and which is not my usual way of dealing with things. I'm usually very cool, very very cool headed in the analysis, and I try to be very incisive and to avoid moralizing matters. I don't think that is useful. I think we need to understand how people got there, whether they're good or bad. Well, that's not my decision to make. Um, yeah. So so that's so that's how we got here. I kept writing, and I was shocked that I was able to keep writing almost and publish almost every week. Um, and I don't know how people have kept up with it. I've scarcely kept up with myself. I mean, I've decided to slow down and give people a chance to to dig their way through the archives because I think we covered a tremendous amount of ground. Yeah, and so here on this on because this is almost about the time that we started. Yeah, um, yeah, we've gone for now 2 years, and we're entering the third. Yeah, Meticulous Prime and I, um, we started on Instagram with the Wednesday lives, and we continued. Hello, Meticulous. Shall I bring you on? Yeah, yeah. And so we kept on. We moved over here to to Substack, and Meticulous is really was has been an incredible companion on this journey. I'm always amazed at the depth of and the breadth of his knowledge. I mean, um, he astounds me, and he's been a good companion on this journey, and we've kept this going now. We're entering the third year, and I'm beginning to see that um, we need to move into books and so on. I mean, at the pace I was moving in the past for the first 2 years, but that was impossible. I could just about manage what I was doing. But yes, so we're here, and again, I mean, we've just finished. We've just got into the very juicy aspects of why I use Lacan, right? And why Lacan often loses me. And yeah. Okay, Meticulous, I'm noticing you can't get on. So yeah. So anyway, without me rabbiting on, I'd like to answer some questions if you've got any, and so on. I can't get Meticulous on. So I get to, yeah. Yeah. So please, any questions? I'd love to answer questions. And can you guys see me? My Substack seems to be stuck. Good, I got them. Lift for further reading. You have an extensive book list for further reading at the end of your latest article. Why did you choose those particular publications? Did material content draw you or the qualities of the material? Okay. Okay. So I think you're talking about the the article that I did about relationality and how we organize, and which I call geometric relations. So yeah, because I needed to give people a lot of times when I share sources, really what I'm doing is sharing what if someone wanted to go and do their research for themselves, they could find sources not only that explain where I got to, but also gives them um, avenues to take it further, right? Because part of what part of what I saw was that we needed we needed the kind of intellectual input that not only gave us a historical view, it gave us context, but it allowed us to understand why we think the way that we think and how we could think otherwise, right? It gave you enough so that you could think otherwise. And so what I've always tried to do is be very restrained on giving solutions, because one of the things about our time is that we there's one aspect of our time which is relatively unthinking. There is a common sense, and we often do not leave the common sense, because there are people that you're supposed to disagree with, and so you never look into their thought. And if you look into their thought, you're very restrained. So there are very clear restrictions on the way that we think in our time. And so one of the things I wanted to do with Dystopia Unmasked was to encourage people to think beyond the blinkers that had been placed upon our age. Yeah, so you'll notice I'll quote Marx, I'll quote Lenin, right? And people, if you do that, then people assume that at least you must be um at least you must be Marxist or Leninist or whatever. And if anybody who's followed me will know that I am rather distinctly unideological, right? um, yeah. So, well, Salim, thank you. Um, yeah. So, yeah, I hope I've answered your question. That's why I share. That's why I share them so often. Yeah, it's not to give weight to the work. It's to give it's to give breadcrumbs so that people can follow and develop their own ideas. Okay, and because that's what I want. You don't want to be in often conversations can feel like being in an echo chamber. Yeah, let's talk about Lacan part three. Yeah, I'm trying to get to that article that we were talking about, so I can look at some of the sources again because I haven't looked at it again. Oh, so we're talking about why democracy feels impossible, and I got to go back because some of those sources were pretty good. Yeah. So if you notice, the first lot of sources are on the Guyanese village movement, which many people don't know about, which I think is very, very important because coming out of slavery, those people bought the plantations that they had been on. Many of them bought the plantations that they had been on. And what the British had to do to prevent that, they did two things. The first is they stopped the traditional African, they restricted the traditional African um, susu, which is that people would come together, they put their money together, and they would either have community purchases or it would allow them to aggregate their monies so everybody in a different week or a different month would draw the pot of money, and so that they could have capital, they would be able to have capital. So they used that to buy the plantations and set and divide them. And so that was the first bit. So the British placed limits on how many people could come together and put their money together. Okay, that was the first thing they did. The second thing they did was that they imposed the standard British private property law um, upon the kind of charters of these village movements, so that eventually what that did is that it set private property owner against private property owner when it was designed, when their charters were designed to prevent that, right? And so this idea of geometric relationality comes out of that, comes out of reflection on that. Okay. And so I give sources. Catherine Peters is excellent, right? Raymond T. Smith is excellent. It's available. You can get hold of that on JSTOR. Just register on JSTOR. You can have 100 articles. I'm free. And then of course there is Walter Rodney's work, and there's a little known work that he has, A History of Guyanese Working People, which is excellent. Okay. And I think I first read that as a teenager, and it's a work that one keeps going back to, frequently. Um, and and Rodney's work covers this history of Indo-Guyanese, etc. I mean, his work is excellent. And if you haven't read How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, you should. And then a lot of my thought is shaped by the work of Ibn Khaldun, who is really the founder of sociological history. and and that is precisely because he basically applies and continues to develop what we would call a hadith methodology to history, right? A methodology, because the hadith are the prophetic sayings and actions, so the prophetic traditions within Islam. And so there is a whole there's a whole science of of verification, right? Who are the narrators? What are the historical contexts? What are the dynamics? Right? There's a whole thing of, so that you can come to legal judgments from that. And so Ibn Khaldun applies that discipline to history and takes things further. He makes incredible pronouncements on the nature of economy. He starts talking about economic history in a way that no one before him did. Okay, and so Ibn Khaldun is very important to that, and he has a concept of asabiya, which is about the seed of relational cohesion. So I wanted to talk about that, and I wanted people to have access to that. And then there is the work of Sayyid Farid al-Attas, um, and I think I misspelled his name. It's Attas, it's two T's, um, which is on applying Ibn Khaldun, which is an expensive book, but is worth the investment. Okay. On eBay, you can get a copy of Said Farid Al Atas's book, Applying Ibn Khaldun, for about £40. Okay, but you'll see that the price will be somewhere between £40 and £150, depending on the quality of the edition. And then I don't think that you can talk about politics on these matters without looking at the anarchists. Right? That would be a mistake. That would be irresponsible. So the anarchist lineages I talk about the work of Peter Kropotkin, and he has a work called Mutual Aid, which he again, this is one of the ways that you learn the way that thought is built, is that the works of Darwin were co-opted for political purposes, and so Kropotkin wrote a text on animal behavior by his own observations in Siberia, called Mutual Aid, which is a wonderful book, right? It's really worth a read. And it completely, what he does is that he explodes or implodes the popular views of Darwinist kind of, and I'm not saying that these are Darwin's ideas. I'm talking about what became the Darwinist school, which became a foundation from which the whole idea of survival of the fittest and man again, the strong must predate on the weak, and so on these ideas which began to become foundations of Western thought. And then he has another text called Conquest of the Bread, which is a work of genius. I mean, these are little articles written for a newspaper, and they're short, penetrating, to the point. Sometimes at times completely destroying your ideas of what you thought political economy was, and so on. I mean, what Kropotkin does in The Conquest of the Bread is he really makes you think. And then there is the foundational work of Bakunin, who is and you'll notice a lot of these guys are from the east of Europe. So Bakunin, really, as an anarchist, strong critique of the state, strong critique of the Christian church, as politics, because what you have to understand in European history uh, is that theology was politics, right? Theology was politics. Theology was not only politics, but it was philosophy. And so they are revolting against that, um, and opposing very different ways of organizing, because in a way that had become foreclosed as a way of um, of bringing any kind of radical justice. Um, is that useful? And then, yeah, and then the next one we have here is contemporary and continental theory. So we've got Negri and Hart. If you haven't, I don't want to say much about Negri and Hart. I think you have to read Negri and Hart. Okay, um, which yeah, you just have to read Negri and Hart. Okay, I recommend Negri and Hart, and not so that necessarily as work that you just have to follow, but work that makes you think, because we have to think. And then Foucault, Michael Foucault. If you've read Foucault, you know that my work is very heavily Foucauldian. Okay, so you'll always see Foucault's um, influence on my work. So um, Foucault is always in my sources. And then Lacan, Jacques Lacan. Okay, and and I always go back to Jacques Lacan because I became convinced that it was through psychoanalysis that we would be able to better understand the politics of what we were seeing, because the Enlightenment made the argument of the rational man as man, and so foreclosed many of the other aspects of man which are necessary to understand the political. And so one of the things I kind of look at with my work is that it's almost like a restitution of a of 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 political man, okay, and or the political human being, because man is the idea of man is already a foreclosed idea, yeah, and and so it's and because idea in the Greek had the sense of coming to meet the phenomenon, not the idea of the abstraction of the phenomenon. And I think so. Part of what my work is trying to do is to reconnect with the human being as as a political being, okay, and recognizing that there is a large part of what we do which is affective. It's about how we feel, right? It's about our emotions, yeah, and about the psychic binds that we get into in order to make the world coherent. And standard political theory does not assume that, and then it places that when it happens in the realm of the irrational. And so it ends up with a sense of politics which itself is deeply irrational and problematic. Um, so I mean, you can see. I don't know if you want me to go through all of them, why I chose them. Okay, but yeah, let me engage with some of the things that people have to say. Yeah, Alaikum Salam Yusuf. In Trinidad, the Twin Fortress, where it is not a faded tapestry, but a living, breathing game of chess, where each move in the present is a counter move to a gambit move made a century ago. Yes, the intrigue lies not in open conflict, but in the silent strategic construction of parallel, a single sun. Okay, so this is one of the things, right? Is the understanding that where we got to is always historically mediated. There are decisions, and there are decisions which are the foundations from which the decisions we can make today are there, and the ideas that are embedded within what we think, which we no longer think about. Okay, and so there, you know, we sleepwalk into that. Okay, and we sleepwalk through that. And so often we, like the one dreaming, we are because we end up like the one dreaming our way through the world. Okay, and so yes, it's like the SSR has made a decision in Trinidad, and she's made the decision of falling into line with the United States. Okay, but those decisions are are made based upon decisions which had been made, which are now infrastructure, and which make it very dangerous for Trinidad to to not submit to that. And so often what we do is that we come to the political making moral judgments without really understanding the way that the tapestry is. And so often what is safely politically possible. Um, and 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 I'm not saying that Miss Assar is right, who is the current Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, but yeah, I'm saying that that we have to our political acumen has to be able to understand how actors are where they are, and begin to imagine the consequences of acting otherwise, because the thing that the political is uniquely responsible for are the lives of people. And so I think that we have to have a a a political acumen in a sense which I think is, I would call it post-revolutionary, right? And some people will make me would worry about that, but because revolution has been about the changing, the turning upside down of things. No, I'm saying you have to overgrow the thing. You have to tear it apart from the insides, right? To imagine something which is completely um, new, which is is beyond revolution. Yeah. So that's my position. And so yes, in each situation you have to dig into the histories. You have to understand, and that's what I'm promising in my work for next year. Is I'm going to look at the nature of the nation state, and look at some examples of of what the nation state itself makes clear, makes it reveals about the political human being, and the and how the way that the way the nation state faces the political, how it places incredible amount of pressure upon identity in ways which completely not only transforms identity but perverts it. Okay, because it both requires identity, but it requires not identity that results in autonomy and political leverage, but it is but they are identities which are legible and plastic in the hands of the state. And so the moment that that becomes outside of that ambit, it becomes a source of anxiety for the state. And so that's what I'm going to explore. So, um, so the next book I had on the list was Hegemony and Social Strategy by Laclau and Mouffe, which absolutely, again, these are works which force you to rethink. These are the kind of post-socialists. So they're attempting to re-engage with Marxist ideas. in very different social and political contexts. And then Antonio Gramsci, the the Italian Marxist, absolutely genius, and his prison notes, which because what Gramsci was interested in is precisely what I'm talking about, which is how the political common sense is manufactured, which he calls hegemony. So you'll notice that Clow and Mouffe, right, Chantal Mouffe, and these, Chantal Mouffe is still very, very active. You can connect to her work. Um, yeah, Gramsci died as a result of Mussolini's placing him in prison, knowing he was ill, and in a rather spiteful um, means, engineered the kinds of conditions which resulted in Gramsci's death, because Gramsci had never been strong physically. He was, he was a hunchback, and he always had physical problems, but an astounding mind. So if you can read a biography of Gramsci, I think is quite important to one's intellectual political development. And then there's Franco Bifo Berardi, The Soul at Work, on the Uprising, which, because we have to return the affective to the political, right? So that's one of the ways that we have to engage with the writers, engaged with the political affective. Yeah. And then Deleuze, I never talk about Deleuze without talking about Guattari, because that combination, that tag team has been so generative to thinking, right? The rhizomatic thinking that breaks out of some of the ontological constraints that we are in, right? So, but Deleuze himself has a text which is called Postscript on the Societies of Control, which which we could say talks about platform governance. We could look at, and then Paul Virilio, which is about how velocity, speed, changes the way the speed at which that changes the way that we can respond and understand the political. So yeah, I chose them, and I hope that gives you an idea of why I choose what I choose. If you go through those sources I share, you get an astounding political education. That's the point, right? I honestly don't really care about, except if I'm doing a paper or something, about the sources. I'm more interested in the ideas. Okay, so I'm sharing the sources so you can follow. And that's also one of the reasons why sources are shared. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, I think Roberto Romano, I think in terms of what's going on in Trinidad, at this point, one of the useful things is to understand how and why they're making the kinds of decisions they're making. Whose interest do they make them in? How does that happen? Because at this point, especially when you're not um, saddled with having to make those decisions yourself, it is to really begin to use the opportunity for a deep political education. Yeah. Hi, Billy Bumbo. Nice to see you. Thank you for dropping in. Yeah, I think that's really important, right? So there is there's one thing about, this is what you have done. Yeah, that's useful, right? That's how it starts. We really have to dig in, understand the interests, understand the hegemonic interests, right? And so, at the point that you are able to understand what they must next do, and what they cannot do, that is the point at which a true political understanding of that situation emerges. Uh, but also, that is perhaps the most dangerous orientation politically. Okay, and that's why Mussolini um, killed Gramsci, because Mussolini knew that Gramsci was singularly Italy's most incredible political mind, and and when and in fact, Gramsci had in the Italian Parliament had given an analysis which Mussolini knew undermined his position, but after it, and Gramsci did not speak loudly; he was quite quiet, so you had to strain to listen. He tried to shake Gramsci's hand, and Gramsci refused. And I think that was the source of his spite. Yeah. So it's. I'm saying that that kind of political orientation is dangerous, but it must be it must be associated with a political acumen that understands the effective. What Gramsci did not understand was the outcome of insulting Mussolini that way. So that and why I say that is that Gramsci was always a man who built bridges. See, that was his method, right? And and he failed to do that with Mussolini, and it cost him his life. Um, yeah. So yeah. So that's why I chose those sources. Okay. And also that's what I'm hoping for. Also, if you're going to read the work of a thinker, become very familiar with their biography. I'm going to share. I'm presently reading the biography of Adam Smith by John Ray, and you know, often what happens with thinkers is that um, they have been co-opted into political positions, often that they themselves would have opposed and disagreed with. And Adam Smith is one of those people. I'm not Smithian or something, but also reading their biography, often you understand what their thought cannot be. Okay. And in the case of Adam Smith, also when you see neoliberals making use of Adam Smith's theories in the way that they do, for these ideas of radical market freedom in that way, those are not positions that Smith himself would have been defensible, would have defended. Okay. Smith was very suspicious of merchant collusion to manipulate market conditions, right? He's very suspicious of that. And part of it is because his father was he was born in a town called Kilcuddy, in Scotland, which I noticed that I think I have a Scot here on my on here. Well, we'll call Bruce Scott, and uh, and Kirkcaldy, isn't it? Let me get the name right because I'm terrible like that. But yeah, he was born in Kirkcaldy, and his father was a customs controller. Yeah, so his father. He had two. His father had two positions. But that was the one that really he did. The other one was more ceremonial. And his father had died before he was born. Okay, but that set, which was kind of, they were um, Presbyterian, and they had really built the economy of the that eastern seaboard of Scotland, which was concentrated on North Sea and Baltic trade. And yeah, and so we must understand the context of thinkers so that we know what their thought could absolutely not have been. And so, because often as time goes on, people's thoughts are misused. And we should understand what they were saying, but precisely so that we can think. Kirkcaldy, thank you, Bruce Scott. Thank you very much. Very, yeah. Um, so Kirkcaldy, am I correct? Yeah. Uh, so yeah, so this whole context, and also being able to grasp the psychological orientation of that thinker. These are very important. Yeah. And also the fact, the humility to understand that outside of having experienced the the society and the context of that thinker, that there are aspects of their thought which are close to you, right? Assumptions which you must make based upon your own context. So the more that you can immerse yourself in their context, is the greater chance you have of being able to see into some of the things which structurally constrained them, and so constrained their thinking. And I think that's really important. So part of what I'm trying to do here also is to develop a peculiar kind of intellectual engagement. Yeah. Um, and thank you, um, Bruce Scott. And I think that you are a psychoanalyst. Am I not incorrect? Not. Yeah. So the dangers of thinking outside the prescribed hegemonic paradigm. Whatever truth one finds there calls for a couple hemlock country. Oh, yes, yes. For the reasons that Aristotle left Athens was that to prevent Athens from sinning against philosophy in the way that it had with Socrates, because everybody talks about Socrates. The Athenians um, basically uh, pursued a legal assassination of Socrates. So he had to drink hemlock, and I'm a herbalist, so you'll be walking along the in fields, and sometimes you'll find hemlock. Hemlock is widespread, and that family is very poisonous, and it's like pig's weed. Yeah. So there are other families of that, and so yes, Socrates was forced to drink hemlock, which means that um, he suffocated to death because uh, hemlock suppresses the nervous coordination of respiration and breathing. Aha, the dangers of thinking out. Yes, knowing but the parents of thinkers, so-called silent but prevalent socialization, the dinner table, conversation. Exactly. Yes. Yes, it is at the stand. Yeah. Ah, so you're a psychologist and you're trained as a psychoanalyst in R.D. Laing's Philadelphia Association. Aha. Okay. Yeah. Well, I've been very fond of Lang in my education. I think I think this work by Lang is a work of absolute genius. Yeah. Not if you haven't read it, anyone please read it. And I don't know if you would mind talking about that at some point about your well the about the understanding of psychology in the political. Uh, and I think you're a writer also, aren't you, Chris Scott? Yeah, yeah. I find Lang. I always find Lang fascinating. He gets to the crux of many matters, and he's not that kind of egocentric kind of, um, you know, psychoanalyst. Yeah, which I think we dealt with in the introduction to Lacan, where I was really talking about how Freud was mistranslated. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And but Bruce, isn't it in the texture, understanding the implications of the texture of experience that 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 the political structure of of our construction is most interesting. Aha. Okay. Thank you. Good. So he shared his book, and when I share the video, if he sends that to me, I'll share that again. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Well, Salim, the dream of the kind of the data lords is that um, is that is that data consolidation, analysis, and and the use of that to monitor and modulate behavior within supply chains, etc., is going to be the decisive political act of the future. I I think that they are both right and wrong. Um, that this is all based upon certain um, assumptions, based upon a political order, based upon peculiar political technologies. And what is happening is that how those technologies affect and fulfill the needs of people and fulfill the needs of those data lords or the oligarchy that we have, they're diverging. And there's a point at that divergence at which, because already what has happened is that that peculiar political technology is now in question, right? Yeah. And so, because that is now in question, people begin to dream beyond that. And that is how paradigms collapse. Okay. And they don't just collapse. This is the human political. The human political is a zone of bloodshed. And so, one of the reasons why I do what I do is I'm talking to that. I'm talking to people, but I'm also talking in a language in which I hope that they can listen. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And Bruce Scott is saying yes. The personal is political. The political is personal. Many people in the clinic to reduce their sufferings to psychopathology to individual problems is very misguided. Thank you. Yeah, the whole machinery of personal guilt in psychopathology without without understanding the ontology of a system which makes psychopathology inevitable. Okay, which must not be questioned because you must change, not the system, unless the pressures become so great that and I will say that that it was this kind of attitude that resulted in the kind of irresponsible policies which placed the Weimar Republic in the kinds of strictures and difficulties that it was in order to survive the German defeat in World War One, and then the Treaty of Versailles, and then resulted in the Nazis. Right, the Nazis were the end result of profound mismanagement of the architecture of peace, and 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 resulted in the psychopathology that was Hitler. Um, but he was structural. He was not, he was not that he was structurally mediated, and we have to understand that because it has implications, even especially for the post-colonial states. Anyway, I'm going to be looking at that this year. So yeah, and also it has profound implications for the way that Europe metabolized its implications, its guilt in the Holocaust, which has led to the genocide in Gaza, right? And because the genocide in Gaza is not only it is, how could I don't want to use the wrong term here, but it could not occur without the the involvement of Europe and the Americans. The Americans are paying for it, but again, I spent the first part of my thing pointing the finger, but then you can only point the finger so much. I started going into to how this is structured. How does it happen? Why does it happen? How does it make sense? What is effective here? Right? What is the infrastructure that brings that about? And I was shocked. But for me, it becomes a zone of political lessons, right? Necessary political lessons of the type that Gramsci wrote in his prison notebooks, right? These are necessary, absolutely necessary political lessons. And as I said, they are peculiarly relevant to the post-colonial states. Yeah, Salim. Yeah, Hemlock turns into a keystroke. Yeah, or also the denial of platform time, right? So there's a point at which, because death ultimately is a physical death, which is death in the real world, and then there's symbolic, and there are different gradations of symbolic deaths at which actors are enacting the lesser forms of death. One of them is denial of platforming, um, which is what they were trying to do when Socrates went to Aristophanes' play, which I can't remember the name of it right now, but he was laughing when they were obviously referring to him. He didn't realize that that was going to end up in his death. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, any other comments? Isn't the future? Yeah, yeah. So I think part of the problem of our time is that if we can only imagine within the constraints that we have been given, then we will imagine the future as inevitable. And so we have to understand that education, especially the university education, produces knowledge in service of power, right? Even when you're rebelling, in order to stay within the institution, you have to stay within the institution by saying what is possible, by staying within the strictures of what it is possible to stay within within the institution, and that is designed in the service of power, which is why you find that in capitalist governments, um, their social sciences. So actually, I'll just almost, like sometimes 70% of the people there are socialists, right? Are Marxists. And so the what we have to understand is that it is an enclosure on thinking. And so what I'm hoping, or what I'm doing in this project is breaking the enclosure of thinking. So the misuse and abuse of to make function of the term anti-Semitism. Yes. Whenever it is replaced by the more specific, precise Judeophobia, the manipulative function of that term anti-Semite reveals itself. Yes, yes, yes. Um, yes. And this is a whole world which is manufactured based upon European guilt, which displaced the responsibility of those who must pay for European guilt to Palestine. Yeah. And which binds, um, especially the European industrial elite, which is based upon the German industrial elite, which survived from um, the time of the Kaiserreich, so the time of Germany emerging as an industrial power. So a lot of those oligarchic families have remained a constant part of um, of of the German industrial elite and part of German state function, because they've invented the dual use of technology in that way. And as a result of that, the the industrial oligarchies of Europe are predominantly German. They're almost like 70% German. And they're implicated in the Holocaust, and they're implicated in the use of slave labor. And they never properly paid the compensations for that. Never did. They never had to really accept the responsibility for that. And so that they have come to agreements, and those agreements constrain them. So so we really have to understand um, how these things constrain the political. Uh, like there's a reparations movement uh, for the slave trade, but in it, what will happen? It necessitates the Europeans having to abandon one core aspect of their identities, which is the assumption of innocence. And so I say that is structurally foreclosed. The European would have to become another creature in order for that to happen, and that will destroy European identity as we know it. And so the only way you're going to have that is by overwhelming military force. And so it becomes a hysteric project which will point the fingers, and it will be able to leverage that to secure leverage in order that they shut up. That's it. But at the point that it seriously attacks European identity, the innocence of European identity, you'll just get backlash, and really enraged backlash, because it again, it represents a a a threat of symbolic death. right? Which is annihilation. Would you would you agree with that diagnosis, Bruce? Yeah. Oh, we're heading towards the end. I think we're going to wind up in a few minutes. Yeah. But does that? Yeah. Um. Basically, identity. It has a core which it cannot confront. For it to be stable, it must have a core that it cannot confront, and the confrontation of that core is experienced as symbolic death. So uh, polities do not survive that, and I'm saying that that is to ask too much of the European identity as it is presently constructed. It cannot survive that, and so it will respond by lashing out. Yeah. Well, Robert Romano, you just asked me a question which goes beyond my capacity to answer. Yeah, and it's a good question. What's the implication of the US recently launched next generation Bluebird Block 2 communication satellite on an Indian rocket on December 24th, 2025, aiming to provide direct to standard smartphone 4G to 5G cellular broadband globally, enabling calls, texts, and data from space without special hardware to connect users everywhere, especially in undeserved regions. Yeah. Um, I mean, I can't really answer that question because I haven't actually researched it. But, and even if I did, I might not be the best person to answer that. Uh, there are a few things I can say, which is that the Chinese have invested heavily in the definitions of the next generation, right? 5G and 6G, um, of that technology. And so they've been building terrestrial systems. So part of what you're seeing is the United States trying to leapfrog that. Okay. The problem with satellite is redundancy. Doesn't doesn't there's a greater delay in in the salience of the signal. So the signals take longer. So there's more delay. So that's a problem. The question is whether you can solve that with algorithms. I don't know, but they must try. And basically, what that means is that the Indian um, satellite launch technology is cheaper than anything that they could find. So, and not only that, but um, what's his name? The Tesla owner has shot himself in the foot in the way that he's fallen out with the Trump administration, and, basically because himself and Trump are overgrown children. Okay, particulars. I asked that because through our work understanding my stance to be fanatically depressive in Kleinian sense, I wonder whether polities don't prefer transformation over destruction after deep reflection. I think that's something that you have to look at history to see. Um, in the long run, you have to look at history to see. My my examination tells me that there are some states which are too far, and some unresolved tensions within national identities or the identities of people, which will see them oscillate between frames. And on either side of it are zones of anxiety, and so they oscillate. And then asking them to break beyond that oscillation is usually a step too far. I think European Western identity, Western civilization is under great strife of trouble. Nietzsche's Antichrist critique of Christianity and the ideas of simulation and simulacra, what they are. Yeah. Yep. 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 Oh, thank you, Elon Musk. Yeah, I couldn't remember his name. Yeah. Yep. 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 Who I don't talk about. Baudrillard is somebody I don't talk about enough. Uh, yeah. Yeah. And Nietzsche's Antichrist. Yeah. And his death of God, or God's death in the shaping of the political and the economic, um, is one of Nietzsche's themes. And yes, and so that it places European or Western identity in great difficulty. Okay, but in great difficulty on matters which they themselves have foreclosed. Right, so that there are psychopolitically zones of great affective strife. I don't know if you'd agree with that. Mm. Some may see it as a threat to information control and censorship apparatus. Um, yeah, but you'll see that the thing about information control and censorship apparatus is embedded in telecom infrastructures. Right? I mean, all telecom infrastructure had been precisely built so that it had critical nodes around Philadelphia that the United States could and did and does monitor. Okay, and the Chinese have broken that, and that is a zone of effective tension. Okay, so and that break is irrecoverable. It cannot be undone. So now it is partially about the regionalization of the earth. So the splitting of it into regions of the saved and the damned, which is a recurring theme in in European thinking, which is essentially eschatological, right? And I'm talking about, and I'm not saying that it is eschatological, whether it is secular or Christian. Yeah, and when you see, um, even to the point that I see that Western educated Muslim intellectuals tend to be eschatological also. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I could get myself shot. Yeah, yeah. Does that answer those questions? I'm going to go on to 11:30 and I'll stop. Yeah. And I hope, and Bruce, I mean, I see that you don't get a chance to answer those things in that way. So I hope that, yeah, yeah. So you were using DeepSeek because that's, Robert Romanis says, when I posed that question to AI, the response was, sorry, that's beyond my current scope. Let's talk about something else. Yeah, that sounds like DeepSeek. Yeah. So the DeepSeek has, I find has some of the strongest censorship, um, like ChatGPT or Claude AI will kind of moralize you and warn you. Uh, Claude AI has stronger censorship than than ChatGPT, but I think that ChatGPT has stronger monitoring. Yeah. Okay, well. Thankfully that I was able to answer that particular. So I know that that is I've always found that a difficult one, actually for myself. Okay, because yeah, yeah, I was, I that for me was a point of contention or difficulty when I began to realize how constrained our political zone was. But when you can't find when you can't find examples that tell you that you're wrong, that you're wrong, then at some point you have to surrender to the fact that you just might be right, or there is enough right in the position that you have that for you to change the way that you think for one which is obviously wrong. Uh, Yusuf Ahmed, forgive me here. There seems to be a common theme of European guilt being the enactment of theological principles. So and so died for our sins. Other people suffering the cost of European guilt, just a thought. I think that we have to understand that there's when I talk about the symbolic order, which is the concept there, um, is that there is the way that we think is actually organized. It is, yeah, and so um, that should not surprise you. Okay, in fact, if you're going to think politically, you must think. This allows you to predict where that actor is going to be. Yeah, yeah. Or tell you yes, and meticulous prime yes, or tell you your IP address. Yeah, it will threaten you. Yeah, yeah. The works of the Andalas of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Sufi, who is throughout my life one of my main teacher, actually. Yeah, and yeah, and on the Western crisis. Uh, yeah, and in fact, you know, he thought he's the one who really taught me to think politically. Yeah. Yes. Yes. First, yes. I asked. Well, I understand. I must thank you, Bruce, for actually taking the time. Um, and Meticulous Prime. I asked for about 30 minutes about the progeny of Swedish Nazi politically active in this moment in Parliament, the private sector. Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah, that's very straightforward. Yeah. Um, yeah. Yes, because we have to understand we cannot be under those kind of illusions that you know the our information out is always a zone of anxiety for the state. It never has not been. Yeah. In fact, there was a point in British history around for black communities in which if three or more of you were together in a place, they could arrest you on the sus laws. I mean, they were just you have to accept. I mean, if you have to accept that this is a zone of anxiety for the state, and you have to understand why. Right. The only problem is that it destroys the theological framing of what our political is, because our political uh, predicates itself on the idea of freedom, um, but it can only allow that freedom based upon the destruction of the political leverage of the free, or it's politically unstable, unsustainable. So don't be surprised. Yeah, and and also we can talk about what we're talking about now, but don't assume that it will be always possible to speak about that, right? And again, like read the life of Antonio Gramsci. Um, you'll see the assumptions he made, which eventually undid him, which are necessary. But I'm not. It's not a. It's not a critique of Gramsci to say that he was stupid or something. I'm just saying it's necessary to understand. Meticulous prime. The idea that political science says can make sense without psychology is absurd. Yeah. But then also often the way that that psychology is often used by political science is absurd when it is used. Um, yeah. Um, yeah. So I mean, when I had to develop the approach that I have developed using Lacan, um, it was difficult. I basically had to build it from the ground up. Yeah. But we're all getting degrees in that domain. No wonder the world's in such a mess. Profitable beneficiaries of the mess. Yeah. I mean, there's a time when it worked, right? There's a time when it worked. And we're now at the time that it doesn't. Um, it's just that you have to now become quite honest about. You have to be quite politic about what your political degree um, allows you to allows you to understand. Yeah, because if you take the position of what Lacan calls a hysteric, which is to when this is what you do, what do you demand of me? How did you do this? Which is like, what did you demand? What are you demanding of me? Why did you demand that of me? Right? Then basically you're still in this relationship with power in a way that is you're able to critique, but it is not generative. So I think there's a point at which we have to move into the zone at which our political thinking becomes generative. Yeah. And we start where we start. So often people start with a political degree, which gets them to begin to think politically. But you have to understand that there is a limit to what the university can give you. And if you're waiting for if you need the university to to inscribe you into a kind of being, then you are enslaved to a political view which can never truly politicize you. So that um, we must understand that in a time like ours, that the political thinking demands a zone of education outside of the academy. And so that was one of the things I intended to do with Dystopia Unmasked. Because if we cannot be at the point that we can think in a way that is new, okay, and thinking requires thinkers, okay, thinking that is based upon a thinker um, devolves into guru type behavior, and that is not appropriate to the political. That has its place, but it's not appropriate to the political. And so, yes, so that thinkers must begin to think together, and so they will disagree. And so, the reason why I shared the article that compared Lenin, McCarthy, and Trump is that I'm also saying that there are points at which the political project, in all of its difference, results in the necessity of the kind of creature of the type of Lenin who goes, no, this is what Marx really meant that he couldn't say. Yeah. Okay, so Bruce Scott, the politicians use illegal applied psychology for the political are two peas in a pod. East Germany, Zone, composition of personality, and the nudge unit in the UK. CBT for the unemployed, shame for mongering to get to accept medical fascism. Yeah, because as the political is always a zone of anxiety, and so the psychological. I mean, what's his name? God, I'm sorry. Let me see if I can quickly find it. The psychological is always part of the political. I mean, I'm trying to find a text on mobs that I have, um, and the nature of thinking, which I can't locate, but I'll find it there because there's a whole lineage of psychological thinking, right? Which has always been married to the political. So the the official shunting of psychoanalysis away from its application in the political is a foreclosure because Edward Bernays is central to marketing and public relations, right? So propaganda. And propaganda has always been part of the political. So it's like you say you don't, but you do. Um, your explanations on understanding were instrumental in debunking the Marxist-Leninist approach to opposing capitalism. I've spent most of my life having. Your understanding at micro and macro levels, including sociology, is very intuitive. Yeah, because I grew up around those guys. Okay, I know how they think. I went to the same school as Walter Rodney. Okay, I'm much younger, right? So I didn't see him there, but I knew many of the great socialist thinkers. Okay, and I had to come to my I was reading the Communist Manifesto when I was what 14 or 12, right? Um, so yeah, so I had to you have to come to conclusions about what Marx was doing, what those thoughts were doing, and also what the political as an almost religious ideology cannot do and must do. So yeah, and Bruce Scott, I'm saying that it is not that the academy is broken, but that is what the academy must do. What is happening is that as the situation has changed, it exposes why the academy cannot respond. Okay. Um, yeah. Um, okay. Billy Bumble. Yeah, totally agree, Bruce. I have a completely spurious psychiatric diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia because I refuse to accept it. I am described as obnoxious, derogatory, and challenging. Yeah. Well, that is the zone of RD Lang. That is the zone of RD Lang. Yeah. That is. I'm going to repeat it again. That is the zone of RD Lang. Okay. All right. So I'm basically going to wind up. I'll take another question, one more, and then I'm done. But I hope that this was a helpful session. Um, yeah. Yeah, the state always fears the state always fears the people, for it's using people as a resource. The political system requires the imagery of pedestal for the leaders and the role of the pawn for the people. Yeah, yeah, and so you know, one of the things in the for political understanding is always to be in the habit of putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Yeah, put yourself in the other person's shoes. So imagine if you had to be a state functionary, how you would make those decisions, right? And also read biographies, see how they make decisions, right? Um, was it PD, TD? What's the name? The the civil servant who wrote something of men. I can't remember that book. Yeah, but I'm just saying, yeah, read um, political biographies and so on, right? Because a lot of the political is about the natural. This group are from the damned, and this group are from the saved, right? And from the sense of the state, it's the same thing because that is the way that um, the eschatological framing, right? The of European civilization, which we are part, and and if you're going to think politically, you really have, if you're going to be able to think politically, and my emphasis is on think, right, rather than be forced to be reacting and thinking that you'll think, then you have to be able to generate that kind of nuance, right? To understand why that actor is constrained in that way, why they must do what they must do and what they cannot do. Right. So if you go into negotiations or something with an actor like that and you demand of them what you know they cannot do, then it must be some kind of wild strategy or it is political enough. Okay? Sometimes in negotiations, actor to do what it cannot to expose it. Yeah. I've lost all of I've lost all of the messages. I can't see them. I don't know if you can hear me, but I think that might be the sign that we have to end. So please enjoy your Christmases. And if you're not celebrating Christmas, then enjoy the break and the holidays. And I hope that you come into next year, um, revivified, full of energy and new thought and hope, right? Because the one thing that we must not kill is hope. Okay, and and that, but hope must be disciplined by what we can do. Okay? So it's not that we don't hope, but we also discipline our hopes or discipline our actions with hope on basic and looking at what we can do now and what is appropriate for the stage that you are in. So it's the capacity to recognize where you are. And so with Dystopian Mask, we hoped that to provide a service to people that that helped us to think and ultimately to be able to think together. Okay, it's been a pleasure, and the time is up. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and salams and goodbye and Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all. See you. Bye.